I do love that opening. I really do. It gives you kind of a sense of it. It means different things on different days, and on this day, it means I don't know. It has extra resonance, I guess, because of the events that happened on today at the Capitol. Let me welcome Jim Stewartson and Joe Dempsey to the show. Both of them are not new to you guys, so welcome back, guys. Nice to have you here.
Hi, Zev. Thanks for
Great to be here.
We're going to have an interesting show tonight because we're not just going to look at what happened with the commission and the start of the hearings in the 1-6 commission, which was, of course, riveting to watch today. A real moment that if you had a chance to see it, you were watching history. There's no doubt about it. The fight for democracy was in full display in that hearing room today, and those 4 brave Capitol Police men who described what happened to them on 1-6. Just blew everyone away. It was an emotional day. I have to say, I'm a bit of a crier, but I was crying a lot today. I really was. If I was on TV, I'd probably be a little bit less emotional. But it was hard not to cry because it was so personal. Jim, what did you take away from the day? Oh, can you hear me, Jim?
Oh man, I watched, and the thing that struck. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there is an incredible delay, I think. So it's fine. You're probably...
Did I lose you?
No, you're hearing me. You're just hearing me delayed. So I'm going to stop talking and then let you talk. And then maybe in a few minutes from now, we'll reconnect and get you a better line. I'm stopping to talk now.
The thing that struck me was that it was necessary for those police officers to reconvince part of the country that what happened. Mm-hmm. And it, to me, that speaks to the danger that we're in as a country, where we cannot agree on the simplest facts, including the fact of what we all saw with our own eyes.
Yeah, with multiple cameras and multiple eyewitnesses.
And others are trying to deny.
Yeah, and Joe, I know you had a lot of thoughts about it today. Why don't you take us through what you were thinking? And Jim, maybe it's a good time to reconnect because I think the delay is going to be a little annoying. I don't know why it suddenly showed up because we had tested before, but just reconnect and hopefully it'll sort itself out. Joe, what are your thoughts about
For me,
today?
If I had to sum up the hearings from today in 3 words, it would be emotional, powerful, and required. There definitely was emotion on display. Adam Kinzinger, obviously, choking back tears. Listening to these stories, listening to hear exactly what these men went through, and the women of the MPD and the United States Capitol Police, it's gut wrenching just to hear and to see the injuries. You saw, Officer Ganell's foot. The video was very powerful. I think that it was required in the sense that, we needed to hear what they went through. Everybody in the country needed to hear in plain speak exactly what it was that these men and women had to suffer through and endure. I think the testimony of Officer Dunn was riveting. I think, to get into some of the racial abuses that he had to endure was disgusting. I think that, all of what we saw today was sort of laid out in full view of exactly why Kevin McCarthy did not want to have these hearings. I think that it was very powerful and strong of Liz Cheney. I think that she brings something to this committee that I think the Democrats have been lacking in some ways.
In general.
Yeah, she strikes me as, I want to get to the truth, and we're going to do just that. I think what was really important for me to hear, at least, and hopefully for the country to hear, was that the committee was going to issue subpoenas and enforce those subpoenas. We've been through hearings before. We've seen people just, claim privileges that they don't exist to not have to participate because they just want to, not go through a subpoena or not honor the subpoena. She said we are going to enforce those subpoenas. And I think that's something that's been missing and hopefully will be important for us as we go forward.
It was really powerful at the end. I thought the last few minutes were incredibly powerful when they asked the Capitol Police officers what they wanted to achieve out of the hearings. And, each one of them basically said they wanted to know who was responsible for it. I mean, who was ultimately the person, the hitman analogy, which one of them used, was really, really effective. There's a person who does the hit, but there's also the person who orders the hit, and they want to know who ordered the hit. Right. And I think that's such an effective analogy. And it's really, it was good to hear them on the record say that's what they expected. And it was good to hear the chairman of the committee and the members promise to do that, promise to figure that out. They're both now on the record saying that they're what they want and what they will do in response to that. So I thought that was really good. And Jim, hopefully your sound's better now. Any other moments that really struck you today?
No, I think it was, to be honest with you, it was really just the emotion of seeing so many people cry so openly. Mm-hmm. To me, what that speaks to is what I think is always under considered in these situations, which is the trauma. It's the psychological trauma of these things, which are really the point, right? It's to traumatize and diminish people's ability to function and to work in our society because they've been hurt. Mm-hmm. And you see those officers and for that matter, the members of Congress who've just been psychologically devastated by what happened. And that was the thing, I guess, that struck me the most.
There is such an important thing that happens when you testify, and you can really tell that the ability to speak on the record as they were, to say what happened to them truthfully and honestly and emotionally, they regained power as they were speaking there, and hearing the feedback as well from the dais, which was so supportive of them, and some of them really life-saving moments were described. It really felt like a powerful moment from that way for them too, because they were able to rebuild themselves. It reminded me a little bit of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee hearings in South Africa after the end of apartheid, where the whole point was just about coming and testifying. Sure, there was some police action after that, but the biggest part of it was that everyone got on the record and said what they'd done or what they experienced. And that was a very cleansing process for South Africa. And I felt a little bit like that watching today. There's certainly an element of that. And these hearings are going to just go from here to many, many interesting places, because the three of us have been doing, investigating Jan 6 extensively in many, many different ways, mostly through Q for you, Jim, and Joe. You've been looking at a lot of the day of events as told through the indictments. Was there anything in the indictments that reflected on today's hearings, or was there anything in the hearings today that reflected on the indictments?
Yeah, this was something that really kind of caught my ear when it occurred. One of the videos that the commission played had some audio in it that was using communications. There was police communications about what was happening, where things were going on, what distress calls were being made. But then there was also one in particular that caught my ear that said, "The tip of the spear has breached the Capitol," and that came from the Zello chat. Mm-hmm. That Zello chat channel, that was a secured communication that the Oath Keepers were using. So what stands out to me is in the indictments, it does in fact say the Oath Keepers were using the Zello chat, and there are certain things that were put out into the indictments based on what was said. This particular comment about the tip of the spear, I did not see in the indictment.
So this was new. This was new audio that not previously. And you think that that's language that...
I have heard that language used before by Stuart Rhodes. Wow. I've seen interviews where he has said tip of the spear. Now, I don't know if that was his voice. Sounds an awful lot like him. I'd have to hear it again and again and more of it. But that's just it. If they played that, there is more of it. So that means that they really have the information, and that's information that we'll love to see.
I've listened to that whole tape, and I often I've tried to edit and try to find the best moments, and it sort of feels like it's missing something. It's missing the breach, actually. And so it's really interesting that that's a good observation, that there might be more of that tape. And boy, will it be something if it includes the head of the Oath Keepers. That will be a massive piece of evidence for them. And of course, there they were on that chat, for hours, discussing what they were doing and their intentions for being there. That's one group of people, sort of the militia people that were there. But then there's also the Q people that were there. And it feels to me like since the insurrection, the Q people and the militia people have sort of fused. They seem to have become a unified entity, which is hard to describe how that happened, but it does feel like that we're looking at a movement that is still ongoing and has somehow merged into a one being or one entity.
Yeah, I was struck that they I think it was Officer Hodges used the word QAnon,
Mm-hmm.
which was, I believe, the first time that word was uttered in Congress.
Oh,
I
really?
mean, I mean, at a hearing, they didn't at the last, when they did the previous hearings, no one said the word QAnon. They refused to say it. They wouldn't show, pictures with Q flags in them. It was it looked like they were specifically avoiding the topic. But this time, they were calling the people who did it terrorists. They used the word cult. They used QAnon, and it felt to me that it was the forum that gave them the opportunity to do it. And thank God that Jim Jordan and the other lunatics that they were planning on putting on the commission didn't end up being there,
Yeah.
because I think it was a far more constructive experience for everyone, without a bunch of
Yeah, it would be really
Republicans.
disrespectful. Yeah, if we had
Yeah,
those guys there, and they would have just made the whole thing a sham and unnecessarily
exactly.
so. So your point about language there is well taken about the use of the word terrorists in Congress about these people that came there on January the 6th. I mean, that's I don't know if it's been used before in Congress. Maybe it has, but certainly not in a hearing of this importance. And it was their choice to go there. They chose that language in their opening statements, and they echoed it throughout. I mean, they felt like they were victims of a terror attack.
And
They
came with
were.
receipts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, Officer Hodges basically said to Raskin, he told him, he basically cited to him the U.S. code. He said, this is the definition of terrorism, and it fits. That's why I used it. He said, you've used the word terrorist in your testimony 15 times. He says, that's why I used it, because that's what it fits.
Wow. So then you're imagining a Fox audience, which actually broadcast the hearings today. I was really surprised that they took the hearings live. That Fox audience hopefully is waking up to some new language, which they've not seen before or heard before around the events of 1/6. Probably not. The truth of they probably are going to continue their large scale cover up, but at least the audience that would have seen the hearing today would have seen something remarkably different than they've been fed by Fox News up until this point.
Certainly so. Not to mention Newsmax and OAN and the really compromised networks that are literally just doing Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
At least, Fox occasionally has a bit of a,
they've had a one-day reprieve this week, I think, when they said it was okay to get vaccines. But other than that, they're in Looneyville. It's good that you bring those networks up, because we've mentioned OAN on this network on the show before. And OAN, we've discovered since, is really a Moonies-based network. They get their funding through the Moonies organization, who even knew they existed, never mind that they had enough money to run a American TV network. But since then, I've been digging into other networks in the United States and other forms of influence, whether they're financial influence or just propaganda influence. And one thing that keeps coming up is the Epoch Times and the NTD, New Tang Dynasty Network. So those two you guys are both familiar with the Epoch Times and NTD, and we are going to spend a little time focusing on how important they were in making Q happen, but also making Stop the Steal happen, and this general thinking, and there goes Jim, I hope it didn't scare him away, and this general thinking that there is a propaganda machine that's coming out of these Asian countries, or at least Asian nationals, that are supporting these propaganda machines. So we're going to dig into that in just a few minutes. I'm going to do a quick break, and we're going to start off with Steve Bannon, which is, of course, the perfect place to start with all things China. So Jim's back on. Let me just make sure he's here, and then I'll try fit in a break, and then we'll come back. Are you there, Jim? You're there?
I am back now. Can you see me?
I can see some parts of you. I can see part of your face. But I'll tell you, while you fix the framing, I will take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back after that.
Excellent.
Yeah. And we're talking about Helix Sleep. We love Helix Sleep. Where are they? Where's my little Helix? My mantra from Helix. So as you know, today's show is brought to you by Helix Sleep. Do you ever feel more tired when you wake up than you did when you went to bed? I used to spend the whole day feeling exhausted and then tossed and turned when it was time for bed. After taking a sleep quiz recently, I realized my mattress was the primary cause of my sleep problems. Helix Sleep knows that you are a unique individual. In fact, aren't we all unique individuals? With their sleep quiz, you can find the perfect mattress based on your body type and sleep preferences in just 2 minutes. Helix offers soft, medium, and firm mattresses that cool you down if you sleep hot, and even a Helix Plus mattress for plus-size sleepers. As a back sleeper who wanted a medium firm mattress, my quiz matched me up with something called the Helix Dusk Lux mattress. Helix Dusk Lux, said that a few times. My new mattress is far more comfortable than what I used to have. It's soft, but still supportive. And now I'm falling asleep right away and sleeping well throughout the night. Helix was awarded the #1 best overall mattress pick of 2020 by GQ and Wired magazine. They have a 10-year warranty, and you get to try it out for 100 nights risk-free. So if you're looking for a good night's sleep, just take the quiz, order the mattress you're matched to. It comes to you right to your door. It's shipped for free. It's a box. A mattress pops out of it. Easy peasy. They'll even pick it up for you if you don't love it after 100 days. But you will love it. Helix is offering our viewers and listeners up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners at helixsleep.com/narrative. That's helixsleep.com/narrative, NARATIV, for up to $200 off and 2 free pillows. Go get them. It's a good mattress. You'll enjoy a good night's sleep with that. All right, we're back with Jim and Joe. It's so nice to have names that are so easy to remember. While you were away, Jim, I was starting to talk about Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon is an interesting character in the world of the insurrection, but also in the world of QAnon and just generally Trump politics. I know a fair bit about him, but you know way more about him. And tonight, sir, because I'm talking about the Epoch Times and NTD, we're going to focus a little bit on his connections to China. But why don't you just explain to us what you think Steve Bannon's role was in January the 6th and in inspiring this whole insurrectionist movement?
Well, it's hard to tell exactly what his role was on 1/6, other than being a general propagandist for, Guo and the Epoch Times and that whole thing. But in general, Steve Bannon is a Duganist who genuinely believes that the world needs to burn in order for the elites to rise. Mm-hmm. He's an occult traditionalist. He follows a guy named Julius Evola, who is a very, very scary Nazi-adjacent philosopher from the early part of the 20th century, who believes in cycles. And those cycles include basically the rabble taking over the elites, a dark period coming over the world, there being an apocalypse, and then the elites rise. Mm-hmm. And Bannon genuinely, in his heart, believes that needs to happen now so that he and his co-conspirators can, take over the world.
I mean, it seems to bear out in reality this theory that there's an elite network of people trying to do something dramatic to the world. I mean, certainly it seems like the coronavirus and these various other things that are plaguing us, including Donald Trump and what have you. You've got a situation which doesn't feel normal, that there is some sort of elite movement. So maybe, the theory is probably wrong, obviously, but the reality of it is that hopefully, but that there are people like Bannon out there trying to do some crazy stuff to us, and it's not just a lot of thinking and talking and maneuvering. They're actually doing it, and Bannon is one of them.
Look at Mike Flynn. It's the same exact thing. They're both apocalyptic ideologues. Mm-hmm. Flynn is a dominionist, so he's a theocratic fascist, basically. But he believes that the end times have to come in order for him to be, saved and taken off to heaven, while everybody else, all us heathens, are left behind. Mm-hmm. That's his version of it, but it's basically the same exact philosophy and creates the same behavior, which is accelerationism. These guys actually want the world to burn in order for them to rise. That's what they actually believe in their heart.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned Michael Flynn and Steve Bannon, because they're two important people in this context, as is Roger Stone. Those are probably the three that I think of the most, were the brains, if you would, behind this 1-6 movement. Michael Flynn we've spoken about enormously on the show, and so we've spoken about Roger Stone as well. It's interesting, all three of them received pardons by Donald Trump just before he left office, which, presaged this. Maybe it gave us a preview of what was coming, or at least gave them cover to continue to break the law as they have done with 1-6 and still escape any prosecution. But these three, when I look at them, they really are the most important people that we're aware of from Trump's inner circle that contributed to 1-6. The thing is about Steve Bannon is he's kind of mysterious. He doesn't really seem to be there. He's there because you see him mentioned every once in a while, but you don't know quite what he did. But the other two are a little easier to understand.
Yeah. Well, Bannon has the war room, right? So, he's a propagandist. And in my view, what he does is he finds the most convenient billionaire to, basically be a parasite on their money and power. And he uses them to get whatever he wants. He did it with Mercer. Now he's doing it with Quo. But it's all in order to push forward his insane vision of the world, which is that, he is this elite that, really needs all these rabble to go away so that, he can have his golden age.
Right. The link as well that I keep coming to with Steve Bannon is Gamergate and a lot of those early iterations of this manipulation of people's minds through gaming, which of course, Jimmy's, you're an expert in, and why we've spoken to you before. But take people through those early days. I have a little timeline here that might be helpful for people to just position everyone. In I guess it was 2005 when Bannon secured $60 million in funding from Goldman Sachs and other investors for something called the Internet Gaming Entertainment, or something, that's the name of the company, IGE. It's a Hong Kong-based company which never actually created any games, as far as I understand. They just sort of played.
No, they just farmed gold and sold it. It was an early electronic asset sort of business where they would get farms of people to go and play World of Warcraft, make a bunch of gold, and then go sell it for real money.
Wow. And then in 2006, this was Gamergate, if I'm not mistaken, which is something I don't really necessarily understand. But
Gamergate started in 2014.
Okay, so what's 2006 then? Something happened. What's a Habbo?
Oh, Habbo Hotel.
Yes.
That was when a group of people early on went and basically crashed this poor little website of people who were, supposed to be having a little social network together, and a bunch of crazy anons, took it over and did a bunch of, really obnoxious shit. And that was kind of the kickoff to the anonymous Chan brigading trolling movement, is, when all that kind of began.
Okay.
It really got serious in the mid teens with Gamergate and some of those things.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about Gamergate without getting too confusing. It was a prequel, if you would, to Q.
Yeah, at the time it didn't know it was a prequel, but for sure, it was a bullshit controversy about women and SJWs in gaming, where a bunch of people used misogyny basically to radicalize a whole bunch of kids, effectively, including starting with people on the Chans, who candidly tended to be fairly antisocial and kind of obnoxious to begin with. But what happened was this thing started on Wizard Chan, and then it went to 4chan, and then it went to 8chan, progressively worse, until there were people dying, there were people getting swatted, and just hundreds of people being traumatized every single day by a giant mass of trolls. And this radicalization engine grew and grew to the point where Milo, who was at Breitbart at the time, paid attention to it and was like, well, looky here, we've got a whole bunch of angry young, largely kind of, conservative leaning people. Let's see how far we can push this. Bannon agreed, and over the course of a couple of years, basically turned Gamergate into the alt-right, including Richard Spencer and that whole thing. The alt-right would not have happened the way it did if it was not for Gamergate.
So when was that? That was around 2014 or 2015?
2015 is when Milo and Bannon started really getting involved.
Okay.
It kind of hit its peak in early to mid 2015, I would say.
Which is really interesting because in 2014 is when suddenly Bannon is part of the Robert Mercer, probably not suddenly, but that's when we find him as part of the Robert Mercer empire, buying Cambridge Analytica, which was a tiny unknown company which no one really knew about, but as it turns out, would end up shaping an American election and maybe Brexit as well. And it was bought mysteriously, by Mercer in 2014. No one really knew what they were doing with it, except Steve Bannon wanted to build I guess there's no other way to describe it, but a mindfuck machine. And that's what they did with Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, they sure did. And Bannon, remember who was involved in it, right? Bannon, Flynn was involved. They were working with Facebook data, which brings in Peter Thiel and that whole thing. So yeah, Bannon knew the power of technology to drive minds. And he saw it directly in Gamergate, and who knows what order these things happened, but at around the same time, he saw an opportunity to technologically do what he was seeing online, but have a better way of targeting people than just people who happen to be, doing Gamergate stuff.
Right. And so the Mercers become big backers of Donald Trump. And in August 2016, Steve Bannon is a Trump campaign manager. And he stays there. They win the election together. And he becomes the chief strategist to Donald Trump. Now, there's something else that happened in 2016, and it ties into Epoch Times and NTD. And I had no idea these things happened. This I found out today. And I was like, what? How come I know this? But there you go. Between 2012 and 2016, NTDT, which is the New Tang Dynasty television network, received $900,000 from Renaissance Technology. And Renaissance Technologies might be the correct name, is Robert Mercer's company. That's pretty unusual. I don't know why this particular fund that Mercer owns would have decided to pay $900,000 to NTDT, but they did. Were you aware of this? Have you ever heard of this before? Does it come into your world? It's interesting, right? It's something not
I had no idea.
And then,
and
then on top of that, it turns out that Steve Bannon used to produce documentaries, which we all know, but he used to produce them for NTDT. And and here's a quote from him, a direct quote: "I'd give them a number on a project budget, and they'd come back and they'd say we're good for that number." Which never happens. If you've ever produced a documentary or tried to produce a TV show or documentary, no one ever says, sure, we'll pay whatever you want in your budget. It doesn't happen that way. So it's pretty weird that for some reason, this bizarre little network that runs out of the Falun Gong Epoch Times world was just handing over money to Stephen Bannon and saying, go ahead, make your documentary. Which, he did some weird documentary in 2016. I find it really interesting that that happened, but also that it happened at the same time that Mercer was giving them $900,000 to do we don't know what with.
Yeah, because they didn't give a shit about the money. Well, that's not what it was about. It was an investment. This is obviously an investment. $900,000 is not even pocket change.
No, it's not.
Robert
But there's
Mercer.
something. It was an exchange for something. It was certainly it indicated something for them.
Certainly,
and
no doubt.
and Falun Gong doesn't need that much money either. It turns out because somehow miraculously the Epoch Times, and I'm not sure I'm saying it correctly. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but maybe it's. Do you know how you say Epoch? Is that?
I think that's correct.
Okay. So Epoch Times, it makes a lot of money, strangely, because it prints actual newspapers. You see them everywhere. You see them in your neighborhoods, I'm sure. You see them in mine. Every day, there's tons of these newspapers dumped on people's doorsteps, and they contain a strange mix of really extreme far-right news coverage. Like it's really strange, and a lot of it is conspiratorial. I mean, certainly when you read it, you would walk away thinking that the liberals were complete communists and taking over the world and destroying it, which is not at all the case. But certainly through the Epoch Times lens of news, that is the case, and they're super supportive of Donald Trump and this crazy white nationalism, which doesn't really make sense for an organization which basically membership is not really white.
Yeah. When you put up that picture of Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, and Steve Bannon, immediately what came to mind was disinformation. And the Epoch Times has been making huge ad buys on YouTube. When you go into a video, your video may start up with an Epoch Times, and it may just look like somebody's just speaking to you in the normal thing. But then by the time you get to the first or second minute of it, you kind of wonder, what are you saying to me here?
Right.
It's weird stuff.
Yeah.
They're
very, very good at that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Facebook ads. And they're also spending money directly on behalf of the Trump campaign, like $1.5 million on Facebook ads for the Trump campaign, which again is bizarre. Like, why would a TV network or a newspaper need to spend money of their money on a campaign? It just makes no sense. Normally it's the other way around. But your point about YouTube is correct, because when I look at, and I might even have the graph here, there is an enormous amount of knowledge now about how Stop the Steal became a term in late 2020 and beginning of this year, and a lot of that came out of YouTube. In fact, most of it came out of YouTube. I'm not sure where the source of this. I think it's Just Security had this on their page, and I won't read you the whole thing, but it said the most of the Stop the Steal terminology showed up between September 1st, 22nd, and February the 2nd, 2021. 70 million engagements on different platforms. More than 43.5 million of those engagements were registered in December alone. So there was certainly a buildup into January. But the 83% of total engagements were registered on YouTube videos. Not necessarily YouTube videos that stayed on YouTube, also replayed on Facebook, Twitter, and other places. But that 83% is such a high number. It's clearly a strategy that someone employed, and it could be that Epoch Times and NTD were among the people who were putting out their content, their conspiracy theory content in YouTube, and then distributing it through other channels. And that's why we're seeing this high 83% of engagement for YouTube for Stop the Steal. I think that was an interesting little bit of data to throw into our discussion here, because YouTube is not often discussed. We do talk about them, but we don't talk about them in the way we talk about Facebook. Nor do we talk about them in the same way as we do Twitter in some ways. But YouTube is a very powerful propaganda operation.
And there's a lesson to be learned in there as well, too. So one of the things about Stop the Steal is, if you remember, it was really coined by Roger Stone back in 2016 during the Republican National Convention, so that if Trump wasn't nominated, they were saying, hey, we got to stop this steal. So in some way, it was kind of ready-made. And then you see what became of it. It sort of evolved from there.
Yeah, so it was America First, by the way. It was the same exact formulation as it is now, which is America First and Stop the Steal and Big Lie. They had that all set up already for 2016, but to their surprise, they won.
Right. Well, some people say it's just a dry run. I mean, some people say that January 6th was just the first time.
Well, now it's the second. Now it's the second time.
The second, because the first time was when? Was
2016.
Yes. Yeah. But
they kind of. You could make an argument that the disinformation that led up to 2016 with. Remember, Guccifer and the emails and the ridiculous amount of disinformation that was happening before 2016
Right.
was also, in my mind, obviously a contributing factor, if not the deciding one, to how he won. So you could argue, even if it wasn't a physical insurrection, that there was a similar attempt and partial success at undermining democracy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So Falun Gong is a religion of sorts, and it originates out of China. It is a very controversial religion in China because for a period of time they were really opposed by the Communist Party of China. There was a big crackdown on them that began in 1999, and they sort of have been operating in the West as an opposition to the Communist Party in China. Which is interesting because you sort of think of the Falun Gong as being anti-China, yet their publications like the Epoch Times and NTDT are more, they're still opposed to China, but they're sort of opposed to a China that existed 50 years ago. It's not it doesn't seem like it's today's China. And so in digging into this, I found something really interesting, that there's the Falun Gong opposition or tension with the Communist Party was with Jiang Zemin, the former leader of the Communist Party. And in fact, there is some détente and maybe even some coordination between Xi, the current leader of the Communist Party of China, and Falun Gong, because they want to be reintegrated into China, and there might be some sort of arrangement there where Xi gets a lot of support from them in their media empire around the world in exchange for him letting them back into China. That made me really, flip my switch, because I was like, okay, that rearranges things in a way that makes sense. It makes sense then that they can be both in Xi's camp and also in Trump's camp at the same time.
Are they in Xi's camp? Because I haven't seen that. Like, for what I've seen mostly with their propaganda is they're anti-CCP, which is the
Yes.
Chinese Communist Party, right? Which is what Xi theoretically is in charge of.
Yeah.
So it's the anti-government, basically, right? It's it's trying to bring China down in the same way that they're trying to bring the United States down, honestly, which is to attack the government.
Except there is very positive coverage of Xi, and that's sort of the interesting thing that I was talking to one of my sources. That Xi gets a lot of support, and Zemin is considered, the guy that needs to be arrested and the bad guy and all of this. But Xi has been given a lot of positive coverage by the Epoch Times, which is interesting. And people speculate that maybe that has to do with the fact that he's, that there is some sort of arrangement back there behind the scenes. And of course, the world of Chinese influence operations is very confusing, and it's not often a straight line, and oftentimes they will run controlled opposition, and it's not they're very good at this kind of stuff in a very underhand way, and it's very hard to see where their allegiances lie. But when you look at the Donald Trump universe, boy, there's a lot of China. There's a lot of China.
There he is.
Right. So, the thing which I'll just go around this, I've done the slide before, but it's worthwhile for everyone to really think about how much China is in this world. So according to the USA Today recently, there was a lot of funding of the Proud Boys that came through an online sort of Indiegogo site that came from mostly Chinese nationals, which surprised me. And apparently not the first time. Apparently that's a great way for the militias or Proud Boys, whomever, to fundraise, is going onto these kind of obscure fundraising sites and getting money from individual Chinese or other Asian nationals. That's one fact point to keep in mind here. Then, of course, there's Wendy Deng, who is Murdoch's. Are they still married? I can't tell. I think they're divorced. But she is a known spy. She's a known spy, right? I mean, she's identified by the U.S. intelligence community as a spy. She's friends with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, and she's been in Murdoch's ear for many, many years. And it's not clear what the arrangement was there, but she's still close to the Murdochs.
She also dated Putin, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Yes, which is also interesting for a Chinese known spy.
Exactly.
And in fact, she was the person who brought Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner together when they were thinking about breaking up. She encouraged them to get back together and stay together. So she's very close to them. which is, about as close as you're going to get to Donald Trump in this world, except if you're Sheldon Adelson and still alive, or Miriam Adelson, because they gave him $40 million. I mean, they gave Trump $40 million for his campaign. They gave the GOP $40 billion as well for their campaign in 2016. The Adelson, of course, is dead, but his wife still has a huge control of his Sands empire, which is the gambling and casino empire, which is now left America. They're no longer an American company. They're now totally based in Macau. Guess what? A Chinese territory.
And she got the Presidential Medal of Freedom, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
Absolutely, because she was free to leave the country. And then, so, I just wonder about Adelson so much there. And of course, tied to Netanyahu and what have you, it just becomes a very incestuous thing. And of course, we can't leave out Eric Prince, because he worked directly for the Chinese for I don't know how many years, but he only got fired, I guess, this year after his little foray into Libya, which was caught by the United Nations. But these are all principal people around Donald Trump. These are not sort of like faraway lackeys. These are people that are involved in the Donald Trump universe and got him elected. And there's a lot of Chinese influence there. Let's just call it Chinese influence. I don't know if any of you want to.
And we haven't even talked about, like, we're talking about all this money. We haven't even talked about the inaugural fund yet.
Right.
I mean,
right.
All this money that's coming in from all these places. Elliot Broidy was pardoned for not registering as a foreign agent for China. He was working on behalf of China and Malaysia.
Was it China? I thought it was.
It was a UAE, wasn't it?
UAE, Malaysia, and China, I believe.
Oh, it was right because of 1MDB. That's correct. You're
that's
right.
That's right. 1MDB.
Thank you. I'll put him onto my charts. I'm not sure I could fit him in, but I'm going to try. So it's quite a scenario. You've got a lot of people in that world that seem to back Donald Trump. It's also, you can't have this conversation without really underlining the fact that Vladimir Putin and Xi are tied at the hip strategically. They have been building something together for decades. In fact, you could argue that Chinese-Russian partnership has existed for so long that it's almost like they're one unified entity dating back to the early Communist Party days. And so you can't have this conversation about Trump being supported by Russia or by China without acknowledging that these two are just really, really, really close. And they don't really do very much without each other. But certainly, if you're going to ask me who the top dog in that relationship is, it's going to be Xi, just simply because of the amount of money that China has to spend on these efforts to destabilize the world, and Putin loves money.
One of the questions that was asked today by Officer Dunn was, who sent the hitman?
Right. Who sent the guy who sent the hitman is actually the question I want to know.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah.
It's because, it sure looks to me very suspicious the more I look into all of this. And then it's just one last little data point before I leave China completely alone. This was interesting, and I missed this. I missed this whole bit of news coverage that happened. And it turns out that in 2017, there was this, I guess it ran through WeChat, which is the Chinese version of our, what's the thing we have on Facebook and
WhatsApp.
Thank you.
Messenger.
Yeah. It was WhatsApp, and you could also spend money on WeChat. So they had this huge 8,000 person community or something like that that allowed top Chinese officials access to Donald Trump and GOP. So we're talking about intelligence officials, Communist Party officials, you name it, all finding their way into Donald Trump's orbit, I'm sure for money or a certain donation or whatever. But that's interesting to me that even in 2017 and once he was in office, the Chinese still ran an influence ring around Trump. So, when he says he's anti-China or no one's been tougher on China, he is lying. So that's a lot to take in, because then you got China and you got Steve Bannon particularly involved with China since, the internet gaming thing might not sound like China, but it really is China. I mean, it's based in Hong Kong, and it sounds like they were using cheap Chinese labor to basically make some money off World of Warcraft, but they were obviously developing something else early on. And so you've got something that starts in 2005, an influence machine that builds all the way in 2005. You've got this NTDT, which suddenly becomes this massive network that operates around the world in 37 countries. And you've got an Epoch Times network, which is a newspaper network, which is vast and still producing content to this day in print, which no one does. No newspapers choose to go to print, but these guys do. And according to my sources, there are two main plants of NTD sort of content farming that happens around the world. One is in Australia and one is in the US. And Australia is very important because it's in the same time zone as Beijing. So it's very easy for them to create that content. And the US is interesting because, well, it's just the United States. That's what they're targeting. There's also a big presence here in Canada where I am. And it's certainly the project all the way into 2016 was to create as much content as possible and on a farm basis to support Donald Trump into the elections. And it also included a campaign, which I mentioned earlier, a Facebook campaign. And by the way, all their properties reach on Facebook was only 3 billion views on Facebook, just all the Epoch Times properties together. And it's one last little data point here, although I said I was almost done. But the one last data point was that they had a big symposium in Australia after they lost the election in 2020. After Trump lost the election in 2020, to discuss strategies for disinformation going forward. Like, why would a Epoch Times want to have a symposium with like a whole bunch of people flying in around the world to talk about how they're going to target, disinformation efforts in the English speaking world in Australia, of all places, in the middle of a virus? It's all suspicious. It's all suspicious.
Yeah, well, because there's a lot of sketchy shit going on in Australia, unfortunately, these days. And, I mean, the Epoch Times is I think, arguably the largest disinformation company on the planet. I mean, every single time I went to a YouTube video to research something or to, watch anything almost that had to do with anything in this zone, there would always be a 4-minute Epoch Times video with some very, very, crisp looking young people who kind of speak in slightly hip language and then suddenly start to veer off into this fucking bananas like Q adjacent propaganda. And it's
not even Q
really
adjacent. Some of it is just Q. I mean, some of the stuff I was like, wow, this is just Q. There's basic satanic cult stuff. Now a lot of it's been taken off, but it's there.
Yeah, but it was paid for, and Google was making an enormous amount of money, obviously, from running these ads, because they were long ads, and they, or you could skip through them, but not before you get a big old what the fuck before you can hit skip ads. And just imagine how many times it takes in order to get to 3 billion impressions, right?
Right.
That's what you're talking about.
It's a lot. And so here they are supporting an insurrectionist movement, which is decidedly anti-communist. I mean, that's sort of the movement is about stopping the Democrats from turning America into a communist country like communist China. And it looks to me, I'll say this out loud, that, the Communist Party is himself funding this organization, perhaps I'll say, and funding these militia groups, or at least the movement or the disinformation movement around these militia groups, to create events like January 6th. I mean, it's hard to take, and I'm sure if and when they finally realize that, I think the people who showed up for the insurrection will be very shocked that in fact there was funding from there and support.
Maybe I don't know. You have to wonder because I mean, look, I think if for your average person who has been brainwashed by this cult, it's going to take a lot more than a bit of evidence to change their mind, right?
Right.
A lot of people need to have there needs to be a long process to work with them to get them reconnected to the world. And just showing them evidence that they're wrong is actually the opposite of what works, unfortunately.
Interesting, because they just
if you give them evidence, then it means that you're obviously on the other side, right? You're obviously a disinformation agent, and therefore you are the enemy. And so now I may not have liked you before, now I hate you. And that's the whole point of the cult, is to set that barrier up between reality and
This
What does
No,
this
work
no.
too
then?
is important. This too is important for the commission. I think that when it comes out of the witnesses that need to be interviewed by the 1/6 commission, I do feel that they need to have some kind of psychological or psychiatry, or somebody who is a doctor who can speak to these things, to speak to how these things are formed, to speak to the people and tell them exactly what was done. I think
Hmm.
that that will be a
Yep,
very important expert to have on this panel.
I agree with you. And I
Yeah.
know the right guy,
Who's that?
Stephen
Who's
Hassan.
that? Oh, I thought you. I thought
No,
you'd be a
not
great guy
me.
there.
No, not
You,
me. Not
but
on
Jim
that.
Hassan would be a great
No,
guy. We got to get him on the show.
Steve,
Actually, I've been dying to get him on the show because Steve is a cult
he's
expert, really, the cult
yeah.
expert.
That's yes, yeah. I think arguably the best in the world.
You mentioned how impressive it looks at Epoch Times and NTD TV, whatever they call themselves. It is a very good looking network. They've spent a lot of money, and I can tell you from working in television for more than a minute, it's really expensive to produce all the stuff and make it look good and have it in 37 languages around the world, and running an influence machine. I don't care how popular your religion is, but it can't be that popular that you can run a newspaper and a TV operation this on this scale and a YouTube operation, which is so expansive. And kudos to Ben Collins at NBC News, who wrote the article about Trump and QAnon and the rise of the Epoch Times by using this Facebook content to fuel that rise. It's a good article, and if you have any questions or doubts about some of the things I'm saying, I'd highly recommend you read that article. But there's more going on behind the scenes, which is fascinating to me, because it's not just the Epoch Times, it's not just NTD, but there's a community in WeChat, apparently, and that is continuing to foster this kind of conspiracy theory world, but also very directly giving instructions to people in militias to take certain actions. I'm going to show you some examples. These are verified examples, and these are translated. So I'm going to try. I'll try show you some of these and get your reaction. This guy is he's well known in the Epoch Times universe as being one of these people, and here he is supporting Kyle Rittenhouse and for the Fight Back Foundation's director fighting for Chinese activist Bob Fu in case charging billionaire Chinese media executive with making terrorist threats. And then it's Lynn Wood is the person he tags. Lynn Wood, who's a lawyer to Donald Trump, also attached to some of this Epoch Times propaganda that we're seeing. Here is the same guy retweeting, I guess Michael Flynn had a premiere of a documentary on the network. Empires come and go, nation states fall. Are we still growing as the beacon hope for the rest of the world? ? I still believe that, but we will not last forever. Michael Flynn getting some primetime coverage there, and at the NTD networks and at Epoch Times. This was a disinformation effort around Kamala Harris. It's been blurred out because it shows some, it's not flattering pictures of naked people, but the point here is that they were making, seeding anti-Kamala content into the space. And then one more here. Get it up. This is the kind of content that they were putting out in WeChat groups and elsewhere. Just really deriding Donald Trump. When you look at the whole, it's at Joe Biden, and if you look at the whole Hunter Biden laptop incident, a lot of it was originated in this world of Epoch Times and NTD. Here's one where they, they're seizing back America. This is a translation on the side here. Reshaping the education, the plague of the BLM movement. Talks about marked by its violence and revisionist view of history, cancel culture. This is all stuff we're seeing manifesting now in the race theory stuff that we're seeing, and it originates way back in 2020 on Epoch Times. So it's not the timing puts them very early in the evolution of some of these stories. And there's some instructions here about some militia groups. I'm going to dive into these a little bit more on a different show because we're running out of time. I want to get your thoughts. But there's, the translation here is at the bottom. I can't really read it that well, but it says, I can't read it because it comes out typing is too small. But hopefully people at home can read it, and then I'll run into these a little bit more deeply on a future show. But I guess the point of all of this is to say that within Epoch Times' network and the NTD network, there's also a social community, which is not only potentially sending funds through WeChat and other groups and other platforms to support the Proud Boys and militia groups, but also seeding disinformation and instructions to those militia groups.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me in the least, right? All of these adversaries have the same goal. And the goal is to destroy democracy. It's really as simple as that, in my view. And wherever they can find a large audience to spew that propaganda, they will do it, including in China. Doesn't matter what language it's in or any of it. If there's a place for them to promote it, they'll do it. And all of the stuff that you were showing there is super typical of Guo, who does that kind of stuff all the time. And in fact, the Hunter Biden laptop video and all that stuff showed up first on Guo's network, his personal network, G4 or something like that.
Yeah, talk about Guo a little bit more. He's interesting because he's obviously when Bannon was arrested, it was on Guo's yacht, his fancy yacht, looking a little drunk and disheveled. But there certainly is a long-term relationship between those two. And Guo's a billionaire who, for the longest time, we always used to think of as being anti-communist party as well. But yet he seems to somehow still be tied in to what's going on in China. Do you know much more about him? No,
Did you have anything, Jeff? Sorry,
yeah, I just wanted to mention, just when you showed those slides and mentioning Guo. Right now in Texas, and I'm not sure exactly of the status, but there is a lawsuit in Texas between Bob Fu and Guo right now.
Oh, really?
And yes.
That's interesting.
One of them is suing the other. Bob Fu, I believe, is suing Guo, and the parts of the lawsuit that I've been able to read so far is sort of outlining, basically who is for and who is against the CCP, and those two are sort of battling out in the court right now.
Interesting. Because they probably, it's probably just a money laundering exercise. That's often how these things turn out. But that's really interesting. I'd love to see that court case. Wow, yes. Thanks for sharing that. That's really good information.
I'm going to continue to read that, yes.
I've got one more commercial break to do, and then we can come back and sum up. But if you don't mind waiting for just a couple more minutes, and I'll see you on the other side of this with some more. Hi there. Thanks for supporting Narativ. This portion of the show is brought to you by Policy Genius. There is no better time than now to apply for life insurance. Each year, you postpone getting life insurance can bring higher rates. But comparing quotes from more than a dozen top insurers is easy with Policy Genius. You can save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policy Genius. You could save $1,300 or more per year on life insurance by using Policy Genius to compare policies. Did I not just say that? I think I might have just said that. But you wanted to hear it again because it's so important. I'll just get the other guys out of the audio here so they can do whatever they need to do. And we'll press these buttons and be back here. Policy Genius's licensed experts are reliable because they work for you, not insurance companies. So they'll guide you through every step of the insurance buying process. Policy Genius's excellent service has been endorsed by thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot and Google. Due to their award-winning policy that does away with medical exams in favor of a phone call, you can get covered in as little as a week. The exclusive policy was recently rated #1 by Forbes, higher than any other option from Ladder, Ethos, and Bestow. Visit policygenius.com and you'll be able to work out your coverage needs in minutes and find out the best price for life insurance. And Policy Genius will take care of the paperwork and scheduling at no cost to you. They never sell your information to other companies or add on extra fees. Head to policygenius.com to get started right now. Policy Genius. When it comes to insurance, it's nice to be right. That's very nice of them to sponsor the show. It's very important for us sponsors to be supported by you too, because we don't get to do these shows if we don't get any funding, and that's where all the funding comes from. So we're back now with Jim and Joe. Joe, give us your thoughts as we close out the show about all the stuff related to China, but how all of this would tie into a still unraveling story of how January the 6th happened and who funded it and how it originated.
So there's a lot I think that still needs to be uncovered. A couple of things stood out as I was going through, and we were discussing. I think on a prior show we talked a lot about the 1AP, the First Amendment Praetorian. And one of the things that came out of listening to interviews with Robert Patrick Lewis, the leader of 1AP, he's an author, and he wrote a series of books called The Pact. And in that, the plot basically is China, Russia, and Hezbollah attack the United States through unconventional warfare. I mean,
Wow.
He said that he's not finished yet with the third book. I kind of wonder
He doesn't
if
know
they're
the
writing
ending.
it right now. Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
So wait, so when was the book written? It's actually, this is really important stuff. So when was it written?
I'm not sure exactly when it was written. It might have been a couple of years ago, maybe 2017. Okay. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't purchase it.
Right. I might actually purchase it. I might go into the dark side because I want to read that.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's very prescient.
Yeah, I believe that there's two. And again, you know, that information, and just another thing I just wanted to say, when we looked at the Michael Flynn picture, the 1AP said that on December 18th, they drove Mike Flynn and I believe it was Sidney Powell to the White House for their meeting, with the to have that meeting on December 18th. Having that proximity to Mike Flynn, having unconventional warfare as a background, as a Green Beret, having that knowledge and information, writing this sort of book that he has written, it really does sort of raise flags and make you wonder what exactly is happening. Mike Flynn, it's very easy to sort of forget the fact, we kind of look at him now and say, oh, he was the guy that got pardoned because he lied to Pence. We really have to understand Mike Flynn used to be DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Advisor. This man knows intelligence and he knows disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
These are
Plus
things
he's
that
got all the Russian training he got. So he's trained
a
by two
PSYOPs guy.
He's PSYOPs guy.
Yeah, right.
He's PSYOPs. He's trained for exactly this. He ran these ops in Afghanistan. That's what he does is run PSYOPs. Always has, and he's been doing it on the American people since 2015, 2016.
Unbelievable.
And he's still doing it today.
And it's interesting that the pact was written by 2015. So when you look at the timing of all of this, and it certainly does ramp up in the 2014, 2015 range, for that book to have been written then by Robert Patrick Lewis, who at that point was just an author, right? No one really knew who he was. That is interesting. That's a really interesting fact point and worth really digesting. And your point about Flynn is 100% correct. I mean, this guy he's probably one of the better trained people out there for this kind of PSYOP material. And I'm sure the Russians have given him a lot of extra education too. So, they're full steam. I can, Jim, you on the weekend had a phenomenal clip that you put out of Flynn at a church receiving a gun, semi-automatic gun, I think, and discussing
an AR-15.
Yeah, unbelievable. And what was his comment? He said something about taking it to Washington, or?
He got an AR-15 with a built-in silencer that cost $4,000 as a gift on the stage of a church.
Yeah, as you do in church.
As one does, yes. And and when he got the gun, he said, "I guess I'll just have to look for someone in Washington D.C." And it was a fairly obscure little event, and somebody who follows him very closely pointed me at this particular event, and because I'm a masochist, I went through all 4 hours and found all the good parts.
I was really impressed with that tweet, and thank you so much for putting it out there. It was really instructive for everybody. I can't believe he can even get a weapon. How can he even own a weapon? He's like a convict. He's like...
but he was pardoned, right?
I know,
so,
but
yes.
It's still crazy when you think about it.
So all of his, it is extremely crazy. And he is trying to, and I do not mean to be, overblown about this, but he is trying to create a civil war. I don't know if you saw the other tweets from that particular event, but there was a video that introduced him where he's literally got a machine gun and he's like putting bullets in the deep state, which is DC. This is right after he's on stage with a whole bunch of kids talking about how we can't teach these kids critical race theory, and there's like a little 3-year-old boy like clapping like, yay, no critical race theory. It's like, like how do these
crazy.
people live with themselves? I don't get it.
It's not only how do they live with themselves,
they do.
why are they still out there? I cannot believe that these guys are still out there, perpetrating this. These are crimes. I mean, I to my mind, they're crimes. I mean, I'm not in the Justice Department, but boy, they look like crimes to me. And they are walking free. I mean, I just don't get it. I'm sure the pardon is effective for crimes committed in the past, but it surely can be challenged for crimes going on right now. And
it doesn't count for crimes right now, and
So
I can
what's going
point
on?
anyone at a billion crimes that he has committed. I
yeah,
have them all.
I'm sure you do.
recorded.
And so
I
it's
don't-
just stunning to me that the Flynn brothers are just wandering around from event to event every week, radicalizing people, fomenting civil war, probably getting paychecks from Russia, China, and whomever else wants to send them money.
And overseeing our Pacific forces.
And overseeing our Pacific forces, because that's a good idea. I mean,
to be fair, Charles doesn't go around to each of these locations because he's busy
he's in the
commanding
Pacific.
90,000 goddamn American troops, which Charles, by the way, actively prevented the National Guard from going to the Capitol because of optics.
Yeah,
that's what he said. He said, "I'm worried about the optics." This is after he gets promoted literally 2 weeks before the insurrection in order to put him in a position where he can make that argument. And then they just go ahead and give it to him.
Well, that's what I don't get.
That was a hell of a Thanksgiving.
I get that Milley, sounds like a really good guy and was out there doing all the good stuff that he needed to do, or seems to in the book that Philip Rucker and I can't remember Carolyn, I can't remember her last name.
Lenig.
Thank you. Carol Lenig put out, and Milley comes across as looking like a decent bloke. But in reality, they still gave the Pacific command to him, to Flynn, and I don't get that. I don't understand why that makes sense, and I don't feel like there's been enough attention still paid on what the military did that day and why they chose to delay for so long. I mean, it took them hours to send the National Guard in, and it just does not make sense that right there in front of their eyes, they were seeing what was happening. Why did it take all of that? Why did it take the vice president to call the National Guard in? Why did that have to happen for that day to finally to end after listening to all these these raw emotions from these police officers today? It's maddening that so little has been done to investigate the military.
It was a coup. Let's be clear. It was a coup that was both planned, attempted, but it was a coup attempt, a real one.
Yeah.
And there were people in the Pentagon who enabled it. Chris Miller, with the help of Ezra Cohen-Watnick and Kash Patel, created a document that prescribed, meaning stopped, the assistance of the National Guard from going to the Capitol without the permission of Chris Miller specifically.
Yeah.
And Chris Miller was put in after Trump lost the election, along with the other dude bros there, and was given carte blanche to create a scenario where it was possible for thousands of white nationalists to attack and breach the Capitol of the United States.
Exactly.
There is no question about that. That is in black and white.
Yeah.
And we still haven't done anything about any of them.
No.
And I am needless to say deeply concerned.
Yeah, it is deeply concerning.
Jamie Raskin made the point today that an attempted coup is just practice, right? It's the thing that comes before an actual coup. So the fact that, again, he's saying it on this commission, hopefully we will start to see some movement in that direction.
But we're not seeing movement in, the president is allowed to move people out of their commands. He's the commander in chief. He can say, hey, Mr. Flynn, you know what, got something else for you to do for the next few years. We're going to hand over the Pacific fleet to somebody else. But he's not doing that. And that to me makes me nervous. There's not much attention being paid to the military. And, this along with what's not happening in the Justice Department and the latest Christopher Wray scandal doesn't give you the greatest amount of confidence in the way this executive is handling what is quite visibly an attempted coup operated by our foreign adversaries, it seems, by Russia, China, and some of our friends. And, we're not, I don't know, there just doesn't seem to be an urgency around very obvious things that you could do, like just redeploy him somewhere else, or fire Chris Miller if he's still there, and so with Watnick is still
Chris,
there. He's not there.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean.
I mean, the one thing that gave me a little hope was Barrick, and I know you had Heidi on last week talking about Barrick, who connects to all of these people, right? To Rudy, to literally all of them, and they're and it may be wishful thinking, and I, God knows I don't, live my life on wishful thinking.
Yeah.
But you could see that there's a progression moving up the chain where Barrick is kind of a middle ground between, the Proud Boys and, Roger Stone and, the real perpetrator.
It certainly does seem like Donald Trump's world is they're closing in on Trump's world. And we're seeing some signs of that as well with Donald Trump Jr. and his lovely Fox News wife or ex-Fox News wife selling their Hamptons home. They're spending all their time doing, these $500 cameo things that people do to raise money for supposedly their charities. But in Donald Trump Jr.'s case, it may be just for himself. But, there's a money situation that's beginning to be a problem for the Trumps because of all these lawsuits, because of what's happening with Trump.org. They're obviously not able to access the same kind of cash that they were before. Plus legal fees.
Which is amazing considering he raised like $300 million after he lost.
Right. So where is that?
Right? He raised $300 million after he lost. By basically traumatizing and browbeating his existing donors, by sending them, I don't know if you remember this, but hundreds and hundreds of emails saying like, if you don't do this right now, like terrible shit's going to happen and Donald Trump's going to hate you. Yeah. Like it was pretty much like that. And he raised an enormous amount of money that had no purpose other than going directly into his pocket. And so the idea that they're doing $500 cameos is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? I mean, it could be that the money's also coming in from China and other places, but you're right. It doesn't look like they have cash flow happening in the way they used to. They probably don't have Weisselberg at their beck and call. Sorry, Joe, I cut you off there.
Yeah.
That's okay. The January 6th Commission is not the only committee that's looking into things as well. I think it's important to also understand that Sheldon Whitehouse has been pushing for more information into dark money, trying to understand what's in these PACs, where this money might be going. I think that we need to have pressure on our representatives to make sure that they are in fact working for us and going after the truth to save the democracy. Sheldon Whitehouse is one of those that has the opportunity to do that within his committee. Zoe Lofgren is another one, and tomorrow she's having another House, I think she's the House Rules or House Administration chair, and she put forth a document that says these are the people who promoted, incited an insurrection. These are the members of Congress that were, she put together an entire 2,000-page document.
It was an incredible document.
These are the members of Congress, what they said before, during, and after the insurrection. And each one of them sort of lays out through their own tweets, through their own Facebook posts, all the different things that they were doing. And within that information, you can see patterns. You can see what.
You're cut out there a little bit.
Very important that she get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's
it's very important that she get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, the document is really impressive that she did. And there's a lot of great work being done in Congress, and it's fantastic. And I think it's okay for people to pressure either on their social media accounts or on their wherever they want to do it, they're calling their senators or their Congress people, calling the White House or the DOJ. It's okay to say that you think Michael Flynn should be arrested. It's okay to say that Charles Flynn shouldn't be in charge of the Pacific Fleet. A lot of this ultimately is public pressure. So the more attention that is paid to it, the more media attention gets paid to it, the more stuff will change. And we can all be frustrated, but there's more things we can do.
Sorry, Zev. Another thing that's important is HR 1. I think that, we look at why aren't things happening? Why isn't the president, paying attention to what's going on in the Pacific forces? HR 1 is the priority. We must pass HR 1 for the People Act. We absolutely have to. The democracy relies upon it. Call your senators. We must pass HR 1.
that, and there's the infrastructure bill, which we'll see where that goes. There's lots happening. We'll see. There's a huge legislative agenda, but that doesn't mean from an executive perspective the White House can't be doing something to try and mitigate some of these risks. Guys, we got to go, but that was an amazing show. Thank you so much for being here. Jim Stewartson, the Q killer, the Q expert. I don't know what to call you. Q catcher. Thank you very much for being here. Everyone should follow you at Jim Stewartson, right? If I'm not mistaken.
That's it.
One of my favorite accounts to follow. It really is. And so follow him every day. And Joe Dempsey at Dempsey2. He's always a regular on the show and does some phenomenal research for us. And we won't be around for a few weeks, meaning the narrative crowd won't be around for a few weeks. We're taking a tiny little break, although we will be here on Friday. But next week there will not be a show, and the week after I don't think there'll be a show because we need some retooling time and we need some investigating time, and some relaxing time because this is a lot of work. So we want to thank you very much for staying as Patreon supporters. If you are on Patreon, and keep supporting us because we really need that injection of funding. But we'll be back after that whole break with some phenomenal big news, which I can't share right now, but I can just say that that's coming. So this will be the last Tuesday show in the season, and on Friday we'll be back with the last after show of the season. And I can feel the ahs everywhere, but just a couple of weeks, we'll be right back after that. And we want to thank you very much for being supportive of Narativ. So thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jim. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Narativ is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/Narativ.